Okay, Ashley, you should be good to go.
Awesome. Everybody, hello and welcome to OK Google Tell Me How. So sorry for the couple minutes of delay, but even here at Google, sometimes we have technical difficulties. So thanks for sticking in and hanging out with us. Like my daddy always said, the best things in life are worth waiting for. So let's get things kicked off. Perfect. So guys, again, thank you so much for hanging out with us on YouTube Live and continue to show and support your love for our channel. As always, if you want to subscribe, please go to our link and subscribe to our weekly webinar. We're always with you every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And then just some housekeeping. Please use the chat function, ask questions. Today we have a very special guest, so he loves questions. So please use the chat function and we will relay your questions to our special guest. And as always, please check in with our URL here and let us know about your ideas and what you want to see next on our webinar. And coming up next week, so 7 cool things you can do with BigQuery now, featuring our DJ, Jackie B. So Jack Bradham, our customer engineer, who we all love, will be presenting on BigQuery. And as always, it's every Thursday, so we'll see you next Thursday at 1 p.m. And then we want to do something a little different this week. So not sure if all of you are familiar with my girl Posey here, but that's my dog Posey. And we wanted to share some good news with you guys that's related to Google and Google Cloud. But first, before we share some news on Google Cloud, we'd like to introduce you to our newest team member. So we wanted to show the Mid-Atlantic region some love as well and make sure y'all were represented. So we added Mac to our team. A couple fun facts about Mac is located in beautiful Alexandria, Virginia, where is very close to where I grew up. Mac also served in our military and is unfortunately allergic to eggs. So Mac has never had an omelet, or anything with eggs in it. So he lives a very bland life when it comes to food. So welcome, Mac.
Thank you, Ashley. It's good to
You're
join
welcome.
the team. It's good to join DJ Jack, Ashley, Alan, and I'm excited to hear Miles share today.
And if any of you are wondering who that cutie is in the picture with Mac, that is Mac's son, Micah. So he is also the newest member of our team. So congrats to both of our new members, and we can't wait to continue on this adventure with y'all. And then next, something that I really wanted to share with everybody was I'm not sure if you guys saw, but Sundar actually did a class of 2020 commencement speech, and the speech was very impactful and powerful for our graduates of 2020. The biggest thing that he mentioned in this speech was, for all of those who are feeling lost or sad or that need hope, to remember that they will prevail because so many have done so before them. So that was a really impactful message for our class of 2020 to hear. And not only that, Sundaran shared some aspects of his life that kept him going. So for instance, fun facts about Sundar was his dad actually spent their family's whole year's salary to buy him an airplane ticket to go to Stanford. And not only that, the backpack that he used while he was at Stanford cost his family their first month's salary. So someone who has continuously prevailed and gotten through to get to where he is today. And one of his last closing remarks was to everyone is, in order to achieve your dreams and goals, to always be open, be impatient, and be hopeful. So very excited about his commencement speech, and I urge everyone to go check it out. Jack, looks like you're on mute if you're trying to make a little comment.
Yeah, today's the best day the webinar has ever had when it comes to audio. But yeah, we posted that in the comments, so if folks want to check out that YouTube video, and you can just click that later. Don't click it right now. I want you to hang with us. But I guess I did have one question. Mac, you've never eaten an egg, or that was like something you tried and that didn't it ultimately didn't work out? I just want to make sure that I got that clear.
Yeah, it's never. It's never.
We'll just go with never.
Trust me, omelets look good. Like, it looks good. It looks tasty.
Cool.
And
All
guys,
right.
also to clarify on this quote, I was a little impatient and couldn't even take Sundar's advice. It is be impatient. And I clearly didn't have the patience to write impatient. So uh, lead, don't lead by example here. And then a cool product offering that we have coming up and that was announced yesterday was introducing table level access controls into BigQuery, which leads us to our topic next week on 7 cool things to do with BigQuery. So what does this actually mean for us? So now you can control and share your data at even finer granularity. And these table ACLs enable you to share a single table for reading and or writing without the surrounding data set. So in order to learn more about this, please check out the Google Cloud blog, and they go into detail on how this will be impactful to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to make a ton of comments about this. I think I'll save them for later. Come show up next week, we'll talk about it. But if you've ever wanted to just share a table, we can do that now. But give Miles more of his time; it's so valuable. So we'll just
Yes.
keep rolling along here with that.
And
There he is.
Yeah, and with that segue, everyone, I'm so excited to introduce this week's special guest on OK Google Tell Me How, and that is Miles Ward, CTO of SATA Systems. So what's really interesting about this webinar is that Miles brings a lot of different perspectives to the cloud wars that we have, because not only was Miles at Google, but Miles was also at AWS as well. So he can really give us the insight on what both cloud providers have and the pros and cons to both. But in OK Google fashion, a couple fun facts about Miles before we get it kicked off. And I won't read all of these here, but a couple that I thought were really interesting was that he made the desk he works from at home from a door at George Lucas's house. I'm not sure if that was breaking and entering, but but that's an awesome fact, Miles.
He did a remodel and tore out a whole bunch of beautiful Ipe and redwood and doors. And I was working at Amazon at the time, and you have to have a door desk. So why have a crappy door desk when you can have an awesome door desk?
That's awesome. Well, Miles, thank you so much for speaking with us today and with our customers. So, now that you're here and we've gotten things kicked off, would love to hear your thoughts and insights when it comes to, everything that's Anthos, GK, EKS, GCP, AWS, and everything in between. And I know our viewers are really excited to hear that. So I'll kick it off to you to start, and then would love to do some open Q&A in an AMA style.
Perfect. I mean, at a very high level, we are, as much as it seems like it, right? I've been doing public cloud now for better than a decade, made about $4 billion worth of relationships with customers over that period of time to take advantage of the capabilities of public cloud. And we are at the very, very, very beginning of the transformation, right? Current analysis is we're just over 6% of the global infrastructure market is running in cloud. That means the other 94% of the $3.47 trillion in cloud of value is still available to move. And from what we've seen, irrespective of which cloud you choose, it's more efficient, right? GCP, the most recent measures versus data center migrations are easily a 40% advantage if you're using the most naive approaches. So I'm really excited about all of the technologies that Google is building and collaborating with the open source community to build that enable easier access to those platforms, that make it simpler to adopt those platforms, and to give customers more flexibility as they approach consuming them in a pragmatic way. If the first generation of cloud consumers are, say, before the chasm, when they're willing to deal with friction and they're okay with complexity, and they actually kind of like the challenge associated with that, and maybe there are big advantages that they can earn that differentiate them from others, the majority won't tolerate any of that. And so Google's position as a business that has built now 9 distinct products that serve in excess of 1 billion users sets it up to have interfaces and documentation and all of the tools required to make adoption and consumption simple. My role at Google and here at SATA has always been to make cloud easier, because it's too damn hard. And so I'm really excited about a whole bunch of the stuff that's being built now, particularly in Anthos, a lot of the security tools that are being created, a bunch of new products that are coming out that will continue to reduce that barrier to entry for all kinds of different workloads across all different verticals.
Awesome. And you mentioned Anthos, and for our viewers who aren't as familiar with Anthos, would you mind giving us high level what Anthos is, and how you're seeing adoption of Anthos in the industry?
Absolutely. So I wrote a blog post coming up on 5 years ago that asked this very basic question that I had been asked by a lot of customers. How do I run the same everywhere? Right? I sat down with Vint Cerf, who's the inventor of this handy dandy thing you've heard of called the internet. And I was like, how do you build an internet without an internet, right? Like you can't, yeah, I would have just Google searched on how to build a connection. But he was like, oh no, we had plenty of networks before the internet. You had the DEC network and the Intel network and the Verizon, but they didn't work together and they weren't very useful in comparison to the way that the internet is useful. Why don't you have an intercloud yet? And I was like, oh, that hurts me so bad. Oh, it stabs me right in the chest. So Anthos is Google and a huge community of collaborators across the Kubernetes and Istio, Seesaw, all of the different tools that are built into it. Their approach to building an intercloud, a system that allows customers to consume infrastructure and build applications that run the same everywhere. So today, the beginning of that movement, rather than really even calling it a piece of software, is being able to deploy one of the most popular services on Google Cloud, a thing called GKE, on AWS, on your own bare metal machines at your office. I have one actually in the closet back there. That flexibility means that if I build an application designed for GKE, designed to use Istio for networking control, designed to take the power of containers and improve my utilization rates, I can deploy that out on AWS in a region, in a place where Google doesn't have one. I can put it on an oil derrick in the middle of Pacific if I'm so inclined. We even just did a video where we put one up on the moon. So it's an approach to standardizing a platform that would allow you to build your own development and deployment platform for software, as every company tries to become a software company because software is eating the world. This environment allows SaaS providers, allows banks and healthcare companies, folks with big retail presence, to be able to deploy in a way that's just dramatically more flexible than feeling like you're locked in to any one individual provider.
Gotcha. No, that's an awesome overview. And you mentioned GKE. We have a lot of people who are running on both clouds, but as someone who's experienced in both of the clouds, can you give us a little overview of why GKE over EKS or AKS? What are you seeing in the industry, and why are people continuously moving over?
Sure. GKE, I worked at Google together with the founders of the Kubernetes project. It's really, an undersung hero. Martin Ganholm was the engineering lead that allowed some of his more junior team members to go off on an experiment and try to build a better version of Borg. And here we are today with Kubernetes as the de facto standard for container orchestration, deployed in a zillion different environments, managed by a zillion different companies. That's the kind of open ecosystem that Google tries to sponsor with its open source participation and contribution. That effort, many customers, right? Like my buddy Kelsey Hightower wrote a detailed book that outlined really Kubernetes the hard way. How do you deploy this thing? And it's not a misnomer label, right? It isn't an easy thing to deploy. It is a complicated architecture to operate. And if you compare to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, where the most expensive operations people in the world were the folks running distributed NoSQL databases, so the MongoDB operations people, the Cassandra operations people, and the like. Now, in this generation of technology, it's Kubernetes operators that are by far the most expensive operations people that you can hire. And so companies everywhere were looking for, I want this flexibility and this ease of deployment and these advantages in terms of systematicity of design, but I really need it to be a lot easier than this. And I would prefer to have all of the orchestration and management really down at the center. The core of Kubernetes is a database that hasn't existed anywhere else before, called etcd. And if you know any DBAs for etcd anywhere, I'm sure they can find a quick gig. So being able to rely on Google's SRE team to be the DBA for etcd behind your Kubernetes is a giant advantage. Google knows how container orchestration works because every application at Google is containerized. That's what Borg is. So you take 20 years of production experience with container technology. Remember, Google are the ones who wrote the Linux C group code that got open sourced, that is the backing for Docker containers that created this whole revolution. That operational experience about how to keep container systems online, how to make it so that they efficiently use infrastructure, how to keep them secure, how to set up their networks in such a way as they mirror the flexibility and capabilities of container-based applications. Those are all lessons learned on the Google side, hard fought, that enable them to build a platform like GKE that is so simple to use. And generally, at the most simple, just go through the onboarding docs. Go find the EKS docs or the AKS docs and look how many numbers there are in the steps. Right? Like, it's pretty linear. People like the easy button, and GKE is pretty damn easy. And if you look at the way that Pokemon Go was able to scale on top of GKE, 53 times larger than their worst case predictions to being the largest game in the history of games, it's a pretty strong testament to its ability to handle any customer scale.
Hey, Miles, I know, as you probably know, I came from a long line of Microsoft history.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear folks talking about Borg, and I'm like, yeah, I have no idea what that is. Okay, you know, I know you were here a long time. Can you just talk about what Borg is? Because I mean, yes, I know now, but it seems like a intimidating history of complexity that nobody understands.
Well, you got the right word in the description. Complex is correct. So imagine Google 15 years ago, 17 years ago, search engine company, no other major products, hasn't even really done maps yet. Search engine growth. You can go into the Partnerplex on main campus and see this little curvity chart that somebody drew in crayon that runs the whole length of the wall that shows the growth of traffic to the search interfaces. And every once in a while, there's a little cutoff where it goes, oh, we had to rescale the graph for 10x. And then they do it again, and then again, and then also again, and then again, and then again, right? It's a giant service, and which was originally hosted on like 2 racks made out of bare metal motherboards in the middle of nowhere, right? So if you're in the middle of that growth curve, you have still a very small company, right? Not even thousands of employees, and you're growing one of the largest public facing services in the world. And their requirement to grow meant that engineers in the infrastructure space were hauling ass, replacing computers, moving networks around, changing the configuration of systems, and frankly had to make very hard choices about, I have to turn these 2 computers off even though they're serving traffic, because I have to get this whole rack removed so I can replace it with a rack that's 6 times as dense, right? Like, you're making on the ground, tactical, hard choices about scaling. And so as software developers, Google looked at the problem of either running code directly on machines where it consumes the entire host as a central application, or running code in virtual machines and having to deal with the overhead associated with VMs, found both of those options unappealing. What they needed was a way to cut up the Linux user space into independent components that allowed them to run applications that wouldn't clobber each other. You could have 2 different versions at the same time. And if you had a way to deploy purely into user space, you could deploy much more quickly than rebooting a whole computer. So, okay, now I can move applications around our platform. They set that up and immediately realized, this is an orchestration problem, the likes of which there is no reasonable tooling to solve. Google's already far beyond the scale of any of the commercial software applications. Remember, at the time, the SQL Server database manual that I was reading at my startup said more than 100 transactions a second is really, really hard. And Google's handling millions of transactions a second at the time. So in order to orchestrate the placement of software on computers and to move that software according to incoming demand and according to availability of bandwidth and other limiting resources like compute and memory, They built a piece of software called Borg to run that orchestration. Borg runs all of Google's applications. Now, the word you used was complex.
Yeah.
Writing a Borg CFG, which is the equivalent of a CRD document for Kubernetes, which is how you articulate to the orchestration engine what it ought to do in response to stimuli. Borg's awful. It takes forever to write one of those things out. The amount of boilerplate is madness, and the syntax is confusing, and it was never designed to be consumed by anybody outside. And so what Google found was onboarding new software engineers to the Google platform was roughly a 6-month exercise.
Wow.
So if you could write a version of Borg that didn't suck so much, and you could give it away to people so they knew it before you hired them, doesn't that sound like a giant increase in overall engineering productivity? So that was a pretty easy way to sell the idea of maybe we should build this Kubernetes thing.
Cool. That makes a lot of sense.
That's awesome. Miles, would love to get back on a little bit on the Anthos train a little bit, and how,
Sure.
you are seeing Anthos, the industry, and also, a couple of like buzzwords we're hearing with Anthos, high availability, how people are using this in disaster recovery situations. Would love to hear your insights on, how those factors are playing in.
Sure. So, I think there are a lot of different value propositions for a platform that lets you run the same anywhere. And you have a lot of different stakeholders at customers who have different goals that they're trying to achieve. So imagine you're the head of IT operations, and when there's downtime, the CEO is going to call you. And it doesn't matter if the downtime's because you fat fingered a button and didn't do something the right way, or if your cloud provider is offline, or if the region that you happen to be in is offline, or any number of a zillion other different things. Google has an incredible operations track record. It has better availability than any of the rest, but it still goes down. AWS goes down, Azure goes down, my data center goes down, everybody's stuff goes down. So the only real approach to active high availability, to being able to run in more than one place simultaneously, is to have applications exactly like that run in more than one place. But if they run different APIs, different deployment scripting, different automation control, different everything, you're kind of doubling the ops task as well as doubling the cost. So we looked at Anthos as a solution to be able to deploy in remote locations that allow you to run the same. So my team built a demonstration. Everybody can see it anytime. You just go to anthosdemo.sada.com. I can actually put it on screen because that's the handy way to do it. Click at this button.
Yeah, share it out. We love seeing it.
Who doesn't like demos? So if I go here, there, you got this blue thing in the background and this big green button in the middle and this snazzy Anthos logo on the side. So this means this website got served by GKE. That's on Google Cloud. If I reload, well, now it's green. It's being run off of a toaster. That's a computer that SADA builds to do Anthos demonstrations back in our offices in North Hollywood. If I reload again and again and again, eventually, you get an orange one. That's over in AWS. So this same application doesn't matter. It's not on an even rotation. Sometimes you'll get 2 greens in a row or you'll get 2 blues in a row. It's really globally load balanced to interact with all 3 of the platforms. And I never know, right? If I come to this demo site and I do this button a couple times and I only ever get the blue and the green one, it means somebody on my production operations team has blown up the AWS side, or AWS is down, or the VM has imploded, but the site's still up, which is all our customers actually care about. They want a system that allows them to keep systems online all the time. And being able to deploy that from one pane of glass, control it in one way, have one whole architecture is just dramatically simpler. And because you have that flexibility powered by Anthos, we have a lot of customers that are interested in like, oh, okay, what are the rest of the value propositions? What else do I get out of the box if I can deploy the same everywhere? That sounds great. Well, you also have a very patterned, specific way of building applications. So for software developers, it gets them to market more quickly. If you're in the middle of trying to do, build a more secure application, like everything in Istio is end-to-end MTLS encrypted by default. with automatic rotations of your certificates and manages all of that, that's a giant value add for customers that really struggle with the operational complexity of setting up these kinds of higher order bits. In a bunch of ways, it's Google shipping its internal best practices for everybody else to use with a big easy button on top.
Hey, Miles, quick question. I've had some people ask me this before. When we do load balance across clouds, what do we use for load balancer and where does that sit? And does it cause latency when jumping back and forth?
Sure. So a couple different approaches to it. I think the best load balancer in the world is Google's GCLB, the global load balancer fleet that sits on top of Google's primary broad-based network infrastructure, right? A network about 5 times the size of the public internet. That load balancer allows you to route traffic to any endpoint. And today, in order to be able to load balance between diverse backend endpoints, you'll make some configuration changes to that load balancer to enable remote targets. One of the things that you can also do, depending on the regulatory requirements that you have, HIPAA wants logs about the behavior that happens at the load balancer, something that's not available in the GCLB. So you might run Nginx on multiple hosts and round robin between them. You can do this stuff at the DNS level with Cloud DNS, or maybe your original provider is AWS and you're built on Route 53. You can use Route 53 DNS, but then route to GKE on the Google side. So there's a whole bunch of different tools. That's getting application traffic from the web down to your Anthos cluster. Inside the Anthos cluster, Kubernetes handles node-to-node load balancing. Either you can power that on your own in an on-prem environment using commercial software. You can go buy an F5 router and load balancer. You can use other tools. We've gotten it working with NetScaler as well. Or you can use open source tools there like Nginx or the built-in Seesaw load balancer that's a part of the default deployment.
Awesome.
Hey, Miles, I have a question.
Yeah.
In regards to, so you said there's a big easy button on top. In regards to change management, what do you say to that engineer or that manager who says, my engineer's working on AWS for the last 3 years and training on it? What does it look like when they integrate and adoption? What does adoption look like for some of your customers?
Sure. Many companies, almost the vast majority, right? 80+% of the folks that I talk to imagine that the move from one cloud to another is the same as the last move they did, which was from data center to cloud, right? That's the most recent memory they have of a migration. And frankly, GCP is incredible and has a bunch of differentiated technology, but it's a lot closer to another public cloud provider than it is to your data center. And so the move from AWS to GCP is just vastly easier. One, you have scalable resources in both places. So many of the migrations from data centers are inhibited because you're already out of bandwidth. You're already out of backup storage. Like there's no room to do the work that's required to make a migration happen. AWS, you can scale up a little bit, handle the migration, and then turn everything off. So a couple of important resources to help with that. My team, when I was at Google, built GCP for AWS professionals. It's about 100 pages of documentation that really step through. AWS calls it EC2, we call it GCE, AWS calls it EBS, we call it PD. Makes it really clear the differences between those APIs, the places where the APIs are identical. Remember, GCS exposes a full S3 API, which is a pretty great ease of use thing. So a whole bunch of places where that kind of short circuits the lookup. There's also similar documentation, by the way, for GCP for Azure professionals too. The other thing that can be really useful is all of the migration tooling exists, right? So you need to move VMs, you can use Velostrada's built-in tools for that. You're trying to move containers, you can use Anthos Migrate for containerization. You have databases to move across. You've got Stream and Illuma that's built into Google Cloud to be able to handle that. So lots more software tooling than is present for the on-prem move to cloud. And when you get narrow to Anthos, we heard from a lot of customers, they're like, this is a new thing and I don't know how much it's going to cost and I'm sure I'm going to need a lot of help. And when we tried Kubernetes on our own, it's really hard. So I'm sure that this is going to be hard too. So SADA, my team, we built a packaged fixed time frame, flat rate implementation program. So 6 weeks, you tell us where you want the box, we ship it, we stand up the connections to it, we get your first application migrated onto it, we high five when we're done. It's a really low risk, low pain offer.
So Miles, a lot of times when I reach out or when customers reach out to me about Anthos and these types of deployments, I'm in the data segment, right? So that's like my jam, AI and all that. And their question is, okay, well, I can move my containers around. I get that, but what about these sticky databases, or what about my databases? Like, what do you do? What do you think? Like, what about that?
Yeah, no, data gravity is a thing, and it's critical that technologies like Anthos continue to expand their capabilities to better and better manage stateful workloads. That's the technical term that all the geeks will throw around, like, what do I do with my state? Where's the state go? So there are many, 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 many different APIs for state. So some applications want to talk all the way down to an individual hard drive block device, right? Like, I want to talk to the API for that one SSD. Some want to talk to a file system. Some want to talk to an object store like GCS or S3. Some want to talk to a relational database like MySQL or SQL Server. Some want to talk to a non-relational database or a document database like MongoDB. You have a zillion opportunities to be able to store your bits. Wow, but that's like super complicated. Most of the time, most application developers are picking a state API because they're deploying an application that they either bought or borrowed, and it already tells them which one they're supposed to use. So they don't have a lot of choice, right? They say, well, the instruction manual says I use MySQL 5.7, so you have a button for MySQL 5.7? Conveniently, all the open source databases have built their own, in almost every case, Kubernetes deployment instructions, or even better, CRDs, and Anthos is Kubernetes. So if you can pull those instructions down and follow them, you'll typically be able to deploy a database in that environment. It's critical for any higher level abstraction, object, relational, non-relational, to have a clear design for the lower level abstraction, the block devices, the storage infrastructure that those interact with. So some customers, if they're going to run on-prem, they're going to look at a whole set of partners that the Anthos team has worked really hard to pull together, called the Anthos Ready Storage Partners. So you can work with NetApp, you can work with Robin, you can work with a whole bunch of other folks to get pre-built storage appliances that Anthos will plug into, or to configure your existing environments in a way that's compatible with those designs so that you can run these higher level abstractions on top. Now, for the first thing we were talking about, high availability, it's not enough to deploy the state system in that one Anthos environment. You want to deploy it in all of them. So now you're not only talking about solving the storage infrastructure API layer, but you have to get the networking worked out to be able to replicate across Anthos installation boundaries. So from my GKE setup to my AWS setup, or my AWS setup to my on-prem. Between the clouds, it's important also to recognize the way that the cloud pricing systems were built. Egress networking costs a lot and ingress costs nothing. So if you're going to replicate between the two, you're egressing a whole bunch. So between AWS and GCP, between GCP and Azure, you have products from each that allow what's called, either Amazon calls it a direct connect, Google calls it dedicated interconnect. I think Amazon or Azure calls it direct AGS, or oh no, that's their display.
Express route. Yeah.
Express route. There you go. So there's a whole bunch of these different linkages, and they'll allow you to reduce the price of egress networking, typically on the order of like a quarter to a fifth or a sixth off of retail list rates. So that's a giant minimum requirement, unless you're running like 10 cores in each place and you're running a static website or something. If you're running a real production application with a high performance database behind it, you're going to move enough traffic that having those linkages up front will save you a lot of money. And it's important to have not only that from a cost saving standpoint, but from a consistency and durability of the connectivity between the two, right? That's a private linkage now instead of one that goes over the public internet. Another issue is to make sure that the software applications themselves have really even worked out how they would communicate while also complying with the Anthos design standard, right? So it's not enough to just sort of establish a wide open HTTP plain text synchronization path between these two spots. Anthos wants you to run behind Istio so that you have MTLS edge to edge. So making sure that you establish the connections over those linkages is pretty important. And it's a relatively small number of the relational databases and non-relational databases that have released instructions for that. So my team's literally off working on this now. I think lots of other customers are doing the same, that are trying to work out best practices for the usual suspects, the MongoDBs and Cassandras and ScyllaDBs and Aerospikes and all the rest, to be able to get to high performance distributed systems. Cockroach is probably the one that's the furthest with their instructions, but even there is real complexity in getting that set up deployed. So there's not a big round easy button for that yet.
Cool. Yeah, I get it. I know some of my other peers here want to ask a question, so I'll save my follow-ups on that for later.
Yeah. So Miles, from 2019 when we first announced Anthos, we've come a long way. And so, I remember from the announcement to, bringing the messaging out to customers and showing them, we don't want to break up your happy home. We just want to bring the data to you and be able to have multiple happy homes. But, continuing on that train of thought, how are you seeing the ecosystems and our customers, react to Anthos, and how's adoption going? What are you seeing?
Sure. We're proud to be one of the real premier partners for the product. We've had piles of production deployments already. I think adoption today is really hinges on the transformation that's happening inside of customers. And there are so many challenges, especially this year in 2020, where you have a lot of new situations that businesses are working through dealing with. And Anthos is a pretty good solution to some of those complexities. So say, for example, we've been working with a bunch of retailers. They have, hundreds to thousands of stores. They want to be able to deploy smarter and smarter applications. Jack, you were talking about the data side. They want to be able to do inference at the edge, do ML in their stores to be able to better help customers or stop bad actors, or better identify fraud, or be able to reject all sorts of protections they can put in place. But how do you even get somebody out there to install software? They're not supposed to go to the office, right? I mean, it's a logistically challenging time. Oh, you have one tech that's great at it. Is he flying today? Is she going to get on a plane and make it over there? I suspect not. So being able to have centrally controlled distributed software management becomes increasingly important. So we're in a whole bunch of projects now to work out architectures for best practices for deployments, especially for places that have lots and lots and lots of little installations. So think banks. I mean, how many different banks have a little corner office that has to have a setup, but they don't want to have a huge rack in the back cluster? How do they make that price efficient? Also, and part of the places that we're most interested is working together with healthcare providers, because they're under incredible strain right now. And it's really important that we do everything we can to help. My team has built a data interface called the National Response Portal that allows you to look through and see a whole set of shared data between the hospital providers, how many open beds there are, what are the case reporting rates, what's happening in each of the individual counties. It's really an incredible data interface. And that's the integrations there are all powered by these kinds of platforms. So it's a pretty exciting time to be bringing technology like this, because everybody now kind of expects it's changing time.
And then when it comes to Anthos, being one of our premier partners, where SADA really leaned in. You just brought up this report you guys are doing, and there's also the programs where you help with the Anthos. With Anthos, what are other areas that you guys are helping?
Sure. SADA is Google's #1 partner, back to back. And we're really proud of our collaboration and our focus. We are exclusive to Google Cloud, only do work together with customers to help them adopt what we think is the most differentiated platform in the world. And our growth and our retention of the customers that we care so much about has been evidence of the success of that approach. We have built several different same as I explained, the sort of flat rate opportunity around Anthos. We do that for VM migrations. We do it for database migrations. So plenty of different workloads that we can help you bring on. We're actually building some more of those programs now. We've also spent a lot of cycles because we have such good relationships with Google engineering, often when they have a new toy they want to play show and tell with, we're the ones who get the phone call first. So working together with contact center teams to deploy contact center AI has been super compelling and interesting work. We have a whole bunch of projects now where we're plugging into Google's machine learning libraries, especially BigQuery ML, being able to hook into built-in inference that's just a part of the BigQuery platform. That's an incredible opportunity. We've also spent a lot of cycles helping meet customers in between where the platform providers will meet them and where maybe their first-party engineers would drive. Because I can bring software engineers and install them in your teams to help you adopt the platform for real, we really are able to meet customers where they are and help them take that step to what's next.
Awesome.
Alan,
Thank you so much.
I know Alan's been trying to get in a question or two. He's been pinging me. Did you want to say something, Alan?
Actually, I was wondering, Miles, you said the on-prem one was something, appliance that you guys had in your office. Is that something that's available for customers also, or?
Yeah, we're on version 4 now. We keep making newer prototypes. It turns out, like, Anthos installs on these things you've heard of called computers, and for whatever reason, it's been pretty hard to get somebody to spit out what a reasonable single computer you can buy that runs it is. Right? Imagine the goal for the Anthos development teams is not to install in somebody's closet. They want to be on data centers on hundreds of racks. Well, lots of our customers have workloads and environments that are different than that. So we built this little tiny computer called a toaster that has 24 cores and 128 gigs of RAM and a couple terabytes of NVMe SSD. So it's plenty fast to be able to run the kind of minimum physical footprint for Anthos. We've even built a brand new prototype together with our partners at Dell that's built on, you know what the VESA mount is? It sits on the back of most of your laptop screens if you have one of those.
You can hang it on a wall.
Yeah, so this is a computer that's designed to bolt to the back of your monitor to its VESA mount. So, I mean, it's literally 6 inches by 4 inches by 3/4 of an inch thick. So just like a toaster, we make a little plastic box and you can slide the computers in the top like you're running the teensiest little blade array, right? But even that gets us to 32 cores and 256 gigs of memory and a whole bunch of NVMe SSD. So that's enough to be able to deploy, production, high availability clusters. You can pull out one of the nodes and toss it and stick another one in. So those are absolutely available to customers. They're a part of our flat rate packages. What we found is many customers, it is hard for them to get started plugging into their primary data centers, carving out a space to do these installations, interacting with their broader teams, but they really want to learn about the technology. So we've just really short-circuited by, I send you a box, you stick it on your desk, you have Anthos this afternoon, right? It's just dramatically more straightforward. So that's an unlock for most of our customers to go, okay, now I really do want to stick it in these 2 data centers along with the 50 little remote locations I want to deploy. And that's been, I think, a lot of fun for us.
Very cool. And so if they want to get that going for like their dev teams, but then stand up AWS, stand up GKE quickly, we've got Terraformed templates out there or some sort of automation to be able to do that real quickly also.
Yeah, there's kind of 2 flavors. If you are wanting to experiment on-prem, we just pre-install and configure everything on your behalf and ship you a working device. You plug it into power and give it a Wi-Fi access point, and high five, you're deploying containers from the Google console. It couldn't get simpler. If you want to try it on AWS, my team's gotten that down to 3 shell scripts. So it takes all of about 11 minutes. We actually did a live demonstration of it in a video last week where you can sort of watch the whole thing go by. It's absurdly simple. So the product management teams on the Google side did a great job with the AWS deployment. It is much easier than on-prem, where you do have so much more infrastructure to configure and coordinate, which is why we've been working really hard to make sure that that's a seamless experience for customers.
Very cool.
Yeah. Plus, it means we have a whole bunch of like half-baked prototype toasters laying around the office. All of our nerds like them. They end up being these they're like little badges of honor. You're like, I've got a V2 toaster, and my old one's a V3. So we've been
I was
taking
thinking, man, I'd like to get in on that.
Yeah, we did. I'll see if I can find this photo while we're talking about it. We did a training class, kind of backwards, for Googlers, because there were a bunch of Googlers that hadn't tried Anthos yet. And what we did was brought everybody together. This is when you could travel still, into Vegas, and brought 12 of the toasters with, and then if they could assemble, but not assembled, like totally bare parts, and if they could get them assembled and get Anthos installed and get the whole configuration up and going, then they could take the box home. So here, I'll put this on screen. Yep, this one here. So those are the little toasters there. Each of those little boxes is a monster. So this is us going through and working hard to get even more Googlers onboarded to what Anthos could do.
Let's see, a couple friends in there. Actually, I know we have 5-6 minutes left. I don't know what all we have left for our good friend Miles here.
You'll note the critical tactical asset of the Fritos in the foreground. I don't really know if you can build a toaster without a sufficient number of chips.
Product placement.
I like the glass of white wine right next to the water bottles and the Fritos also. I'm wondering what Fritos pair with.
Apple juice. Yeah. No.
Really, I just thought it was water in a wine glass. Someone was just trying to be fancy.
No, that picture was at 11:30 at night, so it was most definitely a Chablis. Let's put it that way.
Awesome.
It's Vegas. Does it matter what time it was?
No. just being able to get that many engineers to stay up that late without music and party is a pretty incredible thing.
Yeah, that's definitely a feat of its own. Well, Miles, like Jack was just saying, we only have 5 minutes left. So, would love to put it back to you for any closing remarks, words of wisdom when it comes to Anthos and Kubernetes. Like, what do you have to say to our viewers?
Sure. It's easy to listen to the technology landscape today and hear something new every 30 seconds, right? Like Google Cloud's putting out a new feature roughly daily at this point. The broader ecosystem of open source announces a new thing all the time. And so it can be hard to tell when there is something material that changes in the landscape of overall technology. And some of these kinds of tectonic shifts are important enough to make an investment in because they pay dividends over a really long period of time. And because Google saw, and we saw, such a massive degree of performance and ease of use and scalability improvement as a result of the containerization of our platform, you have to imagine how difficult it is to get what is now a 200,000 employee company to standardize on a platform. It has to really be able to show that it's incredibly good to get that much organic buy-in from that many software developers. Kubernetes is taking that place, not only in the public, but in Google. And so orienting as a business around these investments you can make today that will pay dividends over time because you'll continue to watch value and capability accrete into that platform it's just smart business. And when we've seen customers get deployed, it's a pretty rhythmic, simple, linear result. Like, my developers seem to have less friction. Weird, my applications don't go down as frequently. Absurd, my cloud platform costs have gone down fairly materially. Strange, my application seems to have better resiliency. Unusual, we just passed our audit and it wasn't nearly as much of a pain in the neck as the last time. Odd, I'm hiring more customers and it doesn't seem to cost me as much as when they go to the last time. Like, I've only heard that litany of outcomes from a few hundred customers over the last couple of years. So being able to get on the front foot and dive into, a couple of these tools that are, I think kind of truly foundational in the way that the internet was foundational, in the way that mobile was foundational, in the way that, you know, Ajax or, you know, whatever tools you think are at the core of what you're doing. I mean, think about how big of a transformation in the way people approach data Hadoop was, right? Like Hadoop is a project born out of the open source developed against Google's approaches. Kubernetes is a product built out of the open source that Google's approaches. Is anybody following me on this thing? So that those investments can be complex for customers to make, right? It's not clear that any single stakeholder will earn enough value to warrant the cost. So if there's any recommendation, it's that companies get together internally and pool resources, pool focus, pool investment to be able to look at an approach to technologies like this that will benefit everybody in a development and deployment and IT organization. And that sets them up not only to be able to earn great results in the very short term, but puts them on the right foundation that we have every clear view to expanding value and expanding capability over time.
Amazing. Well said, Miles. Thank you so much. And guys, you heard it here first from one of the brightest minds in Kubernetes on what he thinks, you know, we should all be looking at and looking forward to. So Miles, again, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been so much fun. And thank you for bringing your excitement and joy to the cloud. I know all of our customers love it, and music, as you can see behind you.
If you're going to be a nerd, go all the way.
Go big or go home, right?
That's right. That's right.
And with that being said, guys, again, thank you so much for joining us today on OK Google Tell Me How. Please tune in next week for our webinar on BigQuery. And as always, please check in and let us know how we did. And thank you for bearing with us today on some of the technical difficulties. Like I said, even at Google, sometimes we have issues. So everyone, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day and enjoy your weekend. Bye.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.